Hi, I'm Naomi Bennett, and we are looking at the second quarter of 2014, and it's going to be one of the most important periods of this year. So it may require that I do this in two parts because there's so much to cover. The first part is we're going to review the first quarter of 2014 for the S&P 500 to see how it matches with astrological aspects. But let's talk about this time period because it's like a chain of events that are going to snowball into something that creates much more of a crisis mode. And we've already seen it that on, I believe it was about February the 23rd, that Putin went in and invaded Crimea. That hasn't been resolved. There's still a question mark as whether or not he's going to try and take over the lower part of Ukraine, because Crimea is not physically attached to Russia. It's a little peninsula, so he really needs to have a land way to connect Russia over to Crimea, which I think is very likely that he's going to attempt. But then that involves the United States and involves Europe, and particularly in Germany. So we're going to go through all of those possibilities. In the meantime, we're still having issues with Snowden and NSA. Those are activated, and a couple of other things. So it winds up being a very difficult period of time that we're likely to see changes and great volatility in the stock market, and that we will get up into what I call crisis mode, where you have all of these things brewing, and then you wind up having enough energy and enough conflict that we wind up having major news events that rock the stock market. So we can definitely expect to see things go up and down with the stock market. So with this, we will stop this little part and go through some of the charts, and it may take part one and part two to go through the levels of complexity that are likely to occur. But you can expect lots of volatility and uncertainty in the markets until this thing settles down. And I don't see that it's going to truly settle down. We'll have the crisis in the entire April time period, and then it's not going to get anywhere close to resolution until May. So we will start. This is a quick review of what the stock market did this past quarter, and I've marked it with astrological aspects on top of the S&P 500. Look at the vertical yellow line. That is where there was a moon wobble, which is the medium between two eclipses. Generally, you see market turns at an eclipse point, and that's exactly what it did. It turned down, hit a bottom near the 1st of February, and then started climbing back up. And during that period, that early part of February, what we had was a Sun-Saturn aspect that usually represents a downturn, or at least a pullback during that period. And then it climbed out and started reclimbing in February the 12th. And then look at the very top. I have a green line that is horizontal, and that's when the stock market, particularly one particular aspect of Jupiter and Uranus, we're still on the node of Jupiter, which is expansion. I usually associate that with increases in the stock market, and it did climb back up. However, those aspects are over. We're not going to see that kind of result that we saw in 2013 happening in 2014. It's going to be a ragged course down as a downturn. I wouldn't be surprised if the market closed down for the year, but we should have some crisis points during this time where the market's really volatile, and that's this period coming up in April. So with that, notice that Putin entered Crimea February the 28th. We had a short down, but the markets didn't respond too heavily to it. Of course, the Russian markets did. Let's go on to the next chart. All right, here's the astrological chart for the second quarter of 2014. And the big red block is the time period when the intensity of an eclipse period will be occurring. And at the same time, we have something called a grand cross, where we involved two major long-term planets of Uranus square Pluto, and then Jupiter comes involved, and then more importantly, Mars comes involved, which just adds to the fuel to the fire and makes everything more intense. So you have an eclipse period with a major planetary aspect. Definitely we're going to wind up seeing a crisis form, maybe in several arenas, because we have already started the crisis with Europe and Germany and Russia, and the US is involved with that. That's going to continue on through till May, but we're going to have more than likely serious action during this period of time where heads are going to butt, and there's going to be conflict, and there's threat of war that will wind up sending the markets into a panic. However, I don't really see most of this resolving until the end of May, because if you look on May the 10th, we wind up seeing that the planet Saturn goes on the node of Mars. That's again about frustration, headaches, and being in a log jam. And then we wind up having Mars cross Pluto and Uranus again in June 13, 25. That will probably be the end of this period of time, and things will be less rocky. And all of this, of course, hits some charts in the United States and across Europe, and we will review those. It's extensive enough that it's worth looking at all of them to realize how many things could potentially come to the fore and be news items this coming period. Let's go on to the next chart. All right, this is the U.S. chart for July the 4th, 1776 against current transits, and you can see that the sun of the U.S. chart is right hit in the middle of this Grand Cross and eclipse period. So we're definitely going to be involved with this. Obama's chart is not particularly emphasized, but the U.S. is going to have some impact from these events that are going to occur in April. And let's go on to the New York stock market and look at that chart. This is the foundation chart for the New York Stock Exchange. It's involved with this eclipse period in Grand Cross too. So I would expect that we would see some severe up and down volatility, lots of insecurity, and whenever the stock market is insecure, it usually falls. Last year it was supported by Jupiter and Pluto. That has faded away now, and so the optimism and the support of the stock market, I think, is coming to a close from this last first quarter, and we can expect to see that the market's going to fall and be susceptible to the world events that occur in this April timeframe. So pay attention. We will have part 2 of this where we will look in more detail of who and what countries we think are going to be involved. So there is a part 2 next.